I want to go to Rich Rubino right now. He is a political analyst and historian. Rich, thanks for being with us tonight. There have been speakers who have lost re-election, but never one voted out in the middle of their term. Can you talk about how historically significant this event actually is?
Yeah, and you're correct. And the last one is obviously Tom Foley, who in 1994, usually, by the way, speakers represent districts. If they're a Democrat, they're predominantly Democrat. If they're Republican, they're predominantly Republican. Tom Foley's district was becoming more and more culturally conservative, so he lost his re-election bid, the first one since the Civil War. There were two during the Civil War that also lost theirs. But I think the closest similarity to this current circumstance has to be Speaker Joe Cannon. He liked to be called Uncle Joe, but his colleagues called him Czar Cannon. And he was almost omnipotent Speaker of the House. And there was actually a movement by all the Democrats. And at the time, there were about 36. At the time, they used to actually have what was called progressive Republicans, if you can believe it. They got together. Congressman Norris from Nebraska put up a motion to get him off the Rules Committee. Now, believe it or not, at the time, the Speaker of the House was not only the Speaker of the House, but chairman of the Rules Committee. So he was in charge of what legislation got to the floor. He had so much power. And that actually passed, and they got him off the Rules Committee. So the next was essentially a motion to vacate, and a motion to vacate against the congressman was certainly laid upon the table, but it kind of failed miserably. Joe Cannon himself may continue to Speaker, and then eventually the Democrats took over the control of the House of Representatives, but he still stayed in the body. He actually lost his own re-election bid, then came back and served a couple more terms after that.
Yeah, but they named
the spotlight as much.
Named the building after him, and also Rayburn as well. When we talk about towering speakers, we're talking about Rayburn, Clyburn, Henry Clay, not Clyburn, but Henry Clay, Nancy Pelosi. Has the position of the House Speaker now been lessened under the McCarthy speakership?
Oh, absolutely. It's completely attenuated to the extent that Kevin McCarthy, and he had to do this for his own political survival in order to become Speaker on the 15th ballot. This was the first time since 1924 that there was actually contested Speaker election beyond just one ballot. He had to go all the way to the 15th ballot, and he made that deal with the devil, if you will. I mean, in terms of Matt Gaetz basically agreeing that he would support a motion to vacate. So a motion to vacate with only one member of the entire House of Representatives can essentially go up there the way Matt Gaetz did and say, we're going to have a motion to vacate. So they had that motion, and essentially Kevin McCarthy could not garner the requisite 218 votes. So now he is no longer Speaker. In terms of in history, how will history remember Kevin McCarthy? Unless he becomes Speaker again, which has happened with other speakers. Joe Martin is one, Sam Rayburn is another, Nancy Pelosi will come back. This is really going to be kind of an asterisk on the historical record, I think.
Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan used to get together for drinks at the White House. Opposite sides of the aisle, but they managed to get things done. The Speaker is the third in the line of succession. Two of the names being floated right now, Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise. Do you ever see a day that Jim Jordan would actually go to the White House and tip back a few with Joe Biden? Probably not, because Biden doesn't drink, but perhaps they'd have a cup of latte together.
No, I don't. And it's interesting. There's actually another parallel with Tip O'Neill. It was his relationship with Gerald Ford. They're both going up the leadership ladder pretty much simultaneously in the House. And when Gerald Ford became president, Tip O'Neill said they went golfing together, and Tip O'Neill said, "What a country this is! Today we're golfing, and during this election, I'm going to talk about it. What an awful president you were." And he did. He said that Gerald Ford is the worst president we've had since Harding and Hoover combined. But they were essentially friends. And later on, Tip O'Neill said that it was a good thing that Gerald Ford succeeded President Richard Nixon. I think, though, in terms of Jim Jordan and Congressman Scalise, first of all, they come from congressional districts that are overwhelmingly conservative. There is no incentive at home for them to work with the Democratic president, for them to try to negotiate, because they always have the possibility of being cantored. What do I mean by that? Well, Eric Cantor, back in 2014, he was the heir apparent to the throne, if you will, to become Speaker of the House. And he was seen as being too much of a compromiser with the Obama administration, particularly in the immigration issue. And what happened? He lost his own congressional seat, the only majority leader in the House of Representatives in history. The office goes back to 1899 to actually lose his seat. So when you have these circumstances where the Speaker of the House come from these districts that are so overwhelmingly conservative or overwhelmingly liberal, there's absolutely no incentive for them to work with the other side.
Rich, I want you to weigh in on something. The American public doesn't realize that the jobs don't pay as much as they probably think. They pay a lot, but not as much when you consider that if you're from California, for instance, you have to maintain a household in California and a household in Washington, D.C. In Congress, one sign of status is your office. Now Republicans are throwing Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer out of their offices, which are perhaps two of the best pieces of real estate on Capitol Hill. Is this petty politics or what?
Yeah, it's somehow, I don't know what kind of gamesmanship this is, but basically what's happening is, so usually speakers of the House, they either, Newt Gingrich, for example, when Newt Gingrich resigned, when Newt Gingrich decided he was not going to be Speaker of the House, even though he'd won re-election in Georgia, he said, I'm going to resign my seat as well. Denny Hastert broke a precedent by actually the first Speaker of the House since Joe Martin back in the 50s, that after the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives, he stayed in the House of Representatives. So he was essentially Speaker Emeritus. And Nancy Pelosi allowed him that title and gave him essentially a ceremonial office. Nancy Pelosi was given that was given essentially that same privilege. And Congressman Patrick McHenry, who's kind of the interim speaker, if you will, decided she said it's going to be dekeyed by the next day. Now, what the incentive is to do this, why you would pick that issue, if there's some sort of partisan advantage, you obviously can see some here, or if it's some sort of retribution, I don't know. But it is true that Nancy Pelosi did afford that privilege to her predecessor, Denny Hastert. But it's very rare, generally speaking, that after a congressman is Speaker of the House, that they stay in the House of Representatives as a rank and file member.
Rich, I need a one-word answer. House Speaker Donald Trump.
One-word answer, that's all you want? I would say no, but I have to give you a reason. Part of it is there are 18 members of the House of Representatives who are Republicans, who represent congressional districts that were won by Joe Biden. It would be absolute political insanity for them to vote for Donald Trump as Speaker of the House, then go back to their congressional districts and say that Donald Trump is now Speaker. But that being said, there is nothing in the United States Constitution, nothing requiring that the Speaker of the House actually be a member.
And no such thing as a one-word history book. Rich Rubino, political analyst and historian. Thanks for being with us.